Hello, this is Angelia, and you are listening to or watching Why You Do What You Do, the podcast having to do with psychology and human development. I tried to do this yesterday and had technical difficulties, and I was having a little today, so hopefully this turns out okay. But last time we were talking about periods of the lifespan. You have a lifespan, you start out as a baby, actually start as an embryo, but then you grow into old age, and then you unfortunately pass away, or fortunately, however you want to look at that. Oh my! So the age divisions shown are approximate and somewhat arbitrary because, people want to get into the stages of development, early infancy, middle infancy, late infancy. They would divide it up even further, than the basics. We don't even want to argue about that. This is especially true of adulthood when there are no clear-cut social or physical landmarks, such as starting school or entering puberty, to signal a shift from one period to another. So they mean like early adulthood when you're just past 18 before you're 21, 25, and you're young adults and you're learning about the world and how things work, and starting to use some critical thinking. And then you move to middle adulthood and older adulthood. And even though people like to assign an age to that, there's really not a certain age. We all age differently. So you might, start middle adulthood, the things that have to do with that at a certain time, and older adulthood, at a certain time. It really depends on how you take care of yourself. So, again, we ain't gonna argue on that either. Also, individual differences exist in the way people deal with the characteristic events and issues of each period. And we do, some people go from, a teenager to a young adult with no problem. Other people have more of a problem with the transition. Some of them never quite make the transition. And then you have people coming into a middle, age. And some people have no problem with that transition. Some people have the midlife crisis, as, the joke is, and have a problem with that transition. And some people, age gracefully, and some people kick and scream all the way. And again, that depends on how you look at it, whether that's a good thing or not. One toddler may be toilet trained by 18 months, another not until 3 years. And I had that exact thing happen in my home, so I know that's a thing. There's kids that are easier and kids that are a little more resistant, and you really have to let them decide when they're ready, because until then, they're going to fight you if you don't wait till they're ready. But by a certain point, you kind of have to stress the issue that this is a necessary thing in their life and they're going to have to do this. One adult may eagerly anticipate retirement while another may dread it. And that's true too. I've known people that had both opinions, you know. Some people, they retire, that can't stand it, they go back to work. And some people can't wait to retire. Some people love having a retirement and free time to do what they want to do with. Despite these differences, however, developmental scientists suggest that certain basic developmental needs must be met and certain developmental tasks mastered during each period for normal development to occur. And this is how, when we start talking about developmental delays, if you didn't get your needs met in a certain stage, then you carry that into, even though you're aging, your next stage because you did not get those needs met. And sadly, there are adults who are still acting like toddlers because they did not get those needs met. And the best thing you can do is to go to therapy. Do that for yourself. You can be your own best parent if you didn't have, great ones. And you can parent yourself. And some people think that's silly, but no, it's not. You can meet those needs for yourself. You can get guidance from someone, and you can come out a much better, more healthy person if you do that for yourself. Infants, for example, depend on adults to meet their basic needs for food, clothing, and shelter, as well as for human contact and affection. And if any of you are parents, you know this is true. The baby depends on you for everything, and they love you unconditionally. When you walk in the room and say, hi, the smile, their whole body lights up. They love you unconditionally. They depend on you for everything. They form attachments to parents or caregivers who also become attached to them. And of course they do. They depend on you for everything, and you're providing them with, things. Food and love is the most important thing. Excuse me. So they are, dependent on you. And the better you take care of them, the better they're going to be. The more easily they're going to transition, and, I hear people, oh, you baby so-and-so, baby so-and-so. Well, there is such a thing as, not allowing the child to grow up. So there's a line there, but you should dole out the extra hugs because there's been studies that show, touch actually helps wire the brain. So if you're positively touched as a child, hugged and held and, spoken to in a good way, that actually helps wire your brain. Whereas the other end of that actually can stunt your mental growth. With the development of speech and the ability to move about on their own, toddlers become more self-reliant. They need to assert their autonomy, but also need parents to help them keep their impulses in check. So, when they start wanting to go around and cruise the house and things like that, that's when you kind of need to be, something tickled my ear, sorry. Hopefully it's just a hair and not a bug. But, anyway, you got to keep your eyes on them little people. They are impulsive. At that age especially, they're very impulsive when they're, in their late infancy, early toddlerhood. So sometimes you have to be the voice of reason to stop them from doing something they shouldn't do. And unfortunately, there are people who let them learn their own lesson. Well, you don't have to do that. Because as an adult, you are the voice of reason. And unfortunately, children are going to do crazy things because the brain's not wired all the way yet. And as the adult, sometimes you have to step in and say no, and you can explain to them why the answer is no, or why you don't want them to do a thing. It's better to protect them than to let them, make mistakes or just think you're being mean to them, and then they try to do it behind your back anyway and get hurt. So your child understands enough that if you explain to them why this is a no, they can think about that, and that actually will help their brain development. During early childhood, children develop more self-control and more interest in other children. And we all, of course, know that once they start going to school or playing outside with the other kids, that's paramount. What you want of them is kind of on the back burner at that point. Control over behavior gradually shifts from parent to child during middle childhood, when the peer group becomes increasingly important. And we all know that, in later childhood, the friends are it, which you think is not necessarily so important anymore. Not all that of a deal. A main task of adolescence is the search for identity, personal, and that's who they are as a person. And a lot of people have problems with that up into adulthood even. They're just not sure because they were either in a codependent family or the parent was overbearing and they were never allowed to develop a sense of self, who they are. And then these people get out in the world and they're just lost. They have no idea, and unfortunately there are people, with mental disabilities who get out there in the world and they're lost because they're not astute enough to handle this. So, the best thing you can do is to prepare your child ahead of time and not just bring them out into the world. Sexual identity is a big discussion right now. Whew, I ain't even going to get into that. But I will say that homosexuality happens in nature. My uncle had a bull that did not like the cows. He preferred the other bull they got because he didn't like the cows. And then I had a friend who had a dog who did not like female dogs. He preferred company of other male dogs. And, so I'm not even going to get into that, but I just did. If it happens in nature, I'll let you finish that thought. Occupational. Again, they have to decide what they want to do for a living. They have to, have a life and have an income, and they have to decide what they're going to do with their life. As adolescents, they become physically mature. You start out as a baby and you end up as an adult. So in between, you have to mature. And your body matures faster than your brain. So when your body is fully mature, your brain is still not quite there yet. They deal with sometimes conflicting needs and emotions as they prepare to separate from the security of the parental nest. And if any of you have had teenagers, you know that. You know that. The emotions are kind of out of control there. And you can have some problems during that time because they really don't want to listen to you anymore. They think you're dumb because you don't know what's going on in the world nowadays. And, as far as maybe technology and, the current way of thinking about things, maybe that's true. But in general, you have a lot more experience than they do. So even if they don't want to hear it, you can still tell them things in a respectful way. The developmental tasks of young adulthood include the establishment of independent lifestyles, and that's where they go out and they have their own independent life. They should not still be depending on you. They should not, still check with you on every decision they make. They need to be an independent person. Now, it might make you feel good for them to check in and ask you your opinion on all their decisions, but they have to grow up at some point. Occupations, again, the way I dealt with it was the way I learned when we were studying, child development. The thing that you're the best at is going to be the easiest for you, and therefore you're going to want to do more of that because it gives you a feeling of accomplishment. So whatever they were best at in school, they got the best grades in, it came easiest for them and what they like to do. That is a good place to start looking for an occupation if they just really have no idea what they want to do. And usually families. Some people want to have families, some people don't. It's up to them as an individual. Because a family is a big responsibility, and if you're not ready for that responsibility, then you probably shouldn't have one, During middle adulthood, most people need to deal with some decline in physical capabilities. And that's just a fact. Me and my husband are heading towards that older stage of life. And we certainly can't run or lift heavy things like we used to when we were in our 20s and 30s. You'll be surprised one day when you're suddenly trying to do something that you used to find easy to do, and you're like, when did that become difficult for me? So that's just something that's going to happen. At the same time, many middle-aged people find it exciting and challenging in these life changes, launching new careers and adult children, because, sometimes we do change. And when you get into middle adulthood, you start to see the big picture. You start to see the end of the line. You got a finish line there that you're hoping to achieve. And that's great. And then your kids can be grown and leave the nest. And you can have more time to yourself and more expendable income once you get that mortgage paid off, While some face the need to care for elderly parents, and we kind of have that. We're helping my father with groceries, by going and getting them. Otherwise, he's fine. He putters around his house and watches TV, and that's what he wants to do. But my mother-in-law is a whole different story. She was a very dependent personality to begin with, and now she has dementia, and she's having paranoid delusions. So she is kind of a high maintenance. She has made our life very stressful this past year because she is not capable of thinking right. And so we're having to step in quite a bit. She was in assisted living, and then they decided she didn't need to be there. So that is something that we're having to deal with right now. Several days a week, my husband goes over there and helps her out, with like the pill sorting, making sure everything is taken care of, making sure the I's are dotted, T's are crossed for, because she is still physically, getting around and doing things for herself, but mentally, she's just not there. In late adulthood, people cope with losses in their faculties, the loss of loved ones, and preparations for death. And we were just talking about dementia, Alzheimer's. You get more forgetful. I kind of talked to my dad one day, several years ago, and I was like, I don't know what's wrong with me. I'm just forgetting stuff. He's like, well, welcome to being older. It just happens. uh, and, you do want to provide for your children after you're gone. So you need to get your, stuff together in later life. Me and my husband we got wills done before we're not even old yet. We got that done so that's all taken care of in case something happens to us. And if you believe you're going to a different place and a better place, then that's a little easier of a transition for you. It's still going to be scary and confusing when it's your time to go. But, if you know there's something waiting for you, then it's going to be a little bit easier. And studies do show that people who have a higher power have better, more fulfilling, happier lives than people who don't. So that's something to think about. If they retire, they must deal with the loss of work-based relationships, but may get increased pleasure out of friendships, family, and volunteer work, and the opportunity to explore previously neglected interests. And most people do that. They put stuff on the back burner. Oh, I'll do that later. I'll have time for that later. Like raising your kids and working, and that doesn't leave a whole lot of time for other things. You think, well, I'll do that later. And so that gives you time to do that. Now, the people who retire with no plans, no hobbies, no nothing to do are usually the ones that have a harder time with it because they just sit around and they're bored. But, you have things to do. You can make hobbies. You can even, have some passive income, from your hobbies. So, think about that someday you're not going to work and you need to have a plan. And a lot of people do volunteer and, find good stuff in that. Look at old President Carter. That man, I tell you what, he's a beacon to people everywhere, older people who want to, still be useful. Many older people become more introspective, searching out the meaning of their lives. And, they do that. They look back and, what was it all about? you know? And for most people, it's really about what you did, what you enjoyed. When you're 90 years old, in all honesty, is it going to matter how far up the ladder you climbed? Or is it going to matter how happy your life was? How happy you made your children's lives, how, you made your life's goal work out. Because, the job was just a job to make money. Because unfortunately, in this society, you have to do that to keep alive and keep a roof over your head. It's not like in the old days where everybody just bartered and you're like, oh, I like this piece of land, and just pop your house up. It doesn't work that way nowadays. All right, and influences on development. There are many things that influence your development. Students of development are interested in universal processes of development, but they also want to know about individual differences, both in influences on development and in its outcome. So there are processes that everybody follows across the board. Most people have to be able to roll over on their belly and push up before they can just start crawling or just start walking. It would be kind of crazy and amazing if you walked in and your baby's up walking around one day after, he just was about a month old laying him down. That's going to freak you out if that were to happen. So some processes are across the board for everyone. And then there are individual differences. Some children develop faster. Some children develop slower. Again, we're talking about the averages, the law of averages. The average people fall in here, and there's always going to be people to the left and to the right of averages, and that's okay because everybody's different. Excuse me. People differ in sex, of course, height, weight, and body build, in constitutional factors such as health and energy level, in intelligence, and in personality characteristics and emotional reactions. And we can have problems with that sometimes if we don't like a person's personality and that's off-putting to us. And you don't have to say anything about that because clearly that's how they are. So, if they're not hurting you or other people, you can let them be them. And sometimes, I myself have issues sometimes with people's emotional reactions because people who have high anxiety levels give me stress. Their anxiety stresses me out because I'm sitting here saying, there's no reason for this. There's no reason for you to be so anxious about this. You need to stop and think. And of course, if you have a high anxiety level, that's hard to do. You can't just turn it off and stop and think, but medication can help. But sometimes, like I said, I have problems being around high anxiety people because they cause me stress. The context of their lives and lifestyles differ too. The homes, communities, and societies they live in, the relationships they have, the kind of schools they go to for whether they go to school at all, because some people are homeschooled, and how they spend their free time. Everybody's different. The world would be a very boring place, in my opinion, if we all liked the same things, we all like the same food, we all like the same music, we all like to wear the same stuff, watch the same shows. It'd be a pretty boring world and we'd lose things to talk about pretty quick. Why does one person turn out unlike any other? Because development is complex and the factors that affect it cannot always be measured precisely because anything can affect it. I mean, if you saw a dead bird on the road, that might affect you. You might wonder, why is the bird dead? And it might make you end up eventually going into the field of veterinary, or it might freak you out and you become a morose person scared to death that you're going to die someday. Everyone's different and everything affects people differently. So everything in your life affects you. And that's why everyone develops differently. You are the sum of your genetic code and your experiences. However, they have learned much about what people need to develop normally. And we could say as an average, because in psychology they'll tell you there's no such thing as normal. They react to the many influences upon and within them and how they can best fulfill their potential. Again, the nature-nurture thing. Okay, and we're going to talk about age periods and what your physical development and cognitive development and psychosocial development should be. During the prenatal period, which is conception to birth, conception occurs, the genetic endowment interacts with environmental influences from the start. Basic body structures and organs form. Brain growth spurt begins. Physical growth is the most rapid in the lifespan. Vulnerability to environmental influences is great. So any of you women that say, it ain't going to hurt my baby if I smoke or drink, you're wrong. Abilities to learn and remember and to respond to sensory stimuli are developing. And if you've ever, done like where you touch the little feet through your belly or whatever and they push back, you'll know that's true. Fetus responds to mother's voice and develops a preference for it because it knows that that's mom even before it comes out of the womb. Infancy and toddlerhood, birth to age 3. All senses and body systems operate at birth to varying degrees. The brain grows in complexity and is highly sensitive to environmental influence. Physical growth and development of motor skills are rapid. So, kid goes from age 1 just now learning to pull up on stuff to age 3, he's running around hopping and skipping, maybe riding a tricycle. That's a big deal, in development. Abilities to learn and remember are present even in early weeks. Use of symbols and ability to solve problems develop by the end of the second year. Comprehensive and use of language develop rapidly. You start out with like mom, dad, and then by the time you're 3, you can ask, can I go outside and play? Can I have a cookie? So again, that's a big, stretch of development there. Attachment to parents and others form. Self-awareness develops. Shift from dependence to autonomy occurs. Interest in other children increases. So they're realizing there's a big world out there, and they're part of that big world, and they want to experience that big world. Early childhood, 3 to 6 years. Growth is steady. Appearance becomes more slender and proportionate, and they become more adult-like. Thinking is somewhat egocentric, but understanding of other people's perspective grows. Cognitive immaturity leads to some illogical ideas about the world. Memory and language improve. Intelligence becomes more predictable. Attending preschool is common, kindergarten more so. Appetite diminishes and sleep problems are common. Some of the kids have problems sleep. They get night terrors. They get scared at night. And that's something you're going to have to work with them, to help them overcome. Let them know every time they cry that you're there. It's okay. You're going to protect them there. Don't get mad at them and tell them, shut up and go to sleep, when they're little and they're in the bed. Now, when they get older and they're in there talking and having parties and trying to sneak the TV on, then you can tell them, shut up and go to sleep. And maybe not those exact words. Handedness appears, fine and gross motor skills and strength improve. They might be left-handed, they might be right-handed. And it used to be, when I was in school, we had a teacher, my brother was left, they tried to force him to be right-handed. It'll be easier on him. You are what you are. You can't do that to people. It's going to just make them feel bad about themselves. Self-concept and understanding of emotions grow. Self-esteem is global. Now, that's if the child is being well cared for. They develop self-esteem. If they're not being well cared for, they might not. Independence, initiative, self-control, and self-care increase. Gender identity develops. Play becomes more imaginative, more elaborate, and more social. Altruism, aggression, and fearfulness are common. So, they might want to share with this kid, but maybe not with that kid. And that's just part of navigating the world. Aggressiveness can be a big thing with toddlers. You need to teach them that is not okay. We use our words, not our fists. And fearfulness. They might have a lot of fears about different things that are irrational. And sometimes you might explain to them, but sometimes still, once it gets in the head of a toddler, it's hard to get it out. Family is still a focus of social life, but other children become more important. And then in a middle childhood, 6 to 11 years, their growth slows. The strength and athletic skills improve. The respiratory illnesses are common, but health is generally better than at any other time in their lifespan. Egocentrism diminishes. Children begin to think logically, but concretely. So they think logically, but they don't have wiggle room. They don't, have room for there to be other possibilities and things yet. They'll get there. Memory and language skills increase. Cognitive gains permit children to benefit from formal schooling. Some children show special educational needs and strengths. Self-concept becomes more complex, affecting their self-esteem, and that can be to the good or to the bad, depending on what's going on in their life. Co-regulation reflects gradual shift in control from parents to the child, and that is normal. And you want them, to go out and have their own life, so you don't smother them and baby them, because that's not going to be healthy for either one of you at some point in time. Peers assume central importance, and we all know that's the thing with our kids. The friends become more important than you. You're just the grown-up adult that raised him and gave birth to him. It don't matter. The friends know. Even though that's not true. And then adolescence, 11 to about 20 years old. Physical growth and other changes are rapid and profound. Reproductive maturity occurs. And that doesn't mean they should be reproducing. It means it's now possible. Major health risks arise from behavioral issues such as eating disorders and drug abuse. And that's something you have to watch out for with your kids. Eating disorders are more common in females, but they do happen in males. And drug use is basically peer pressure usually. So those are things to look out for. Ability to think abstractly and use scientific reasoning develops. Immature thinking persists in some attitudes and behaviors. Education focuses on preparation for college or vocation. And so they're getting ready to go out into the world because that's going to happen. And it's better if they're ready than if they're not. Search for identity, including sexual identity, becomes central. And, that's when age 11, that's, excuse me, I think I got a gnat in here bugging me. They want to pair up, and that's just going to happen. And with you forbidding that or whatever, that's not going to help. They're just going to sneak behind your back and do it anyway. So you might as well meet those friends, get to know them, and give your child some guidance versus no, because then that becomes, a thing desired, a secret thing, and they're going to go behind your back. So you might as well be on board with this. Relationships with parents are generally good. Peer groups help develop and test self-concept. My goodness, I guess I'm my allergies. May exert an antisocial influence. So if they got antisocial peers, they're more likely to then start putting up boundaries with people and become more antisocial. Excuse me. So that's all we're going to talk about today. And maybe that'll help you see a little bit into how, why you do what you do. Until next time.